I want to tell you a little bit about how using some of the tools from Taiwan might help us instantiate some of the ideas similar to what the Hutchins Commission came up with for preserving a free press. By creating this sense of a common audience that I'm sharing something with, you can recreate this sense of common knowledge, which is, I think, critical to overcoming the problems of loneliness and polarization. Community Notes was an attempt at X to use two things that they had developed in the Taiwan environment, this notion of bridging ranking. At the University of Chicago, led by the president, Robert Hutchins, to rethink the principles that the media needed to obey. You know, we think of now as this very divisive moment, lots of misinformation, but according to long-run studies of the news media, actually, there was this, period afterwards that people think of as this, great period for journalism, but actually things were even worse before the Hutchins Commission than they are now. And I think, we're kind of in a parallel moment. We're in a moment where there is tremendous fear that media, social media especially, are spreading misinformation, polarization, opening us to foreign attacks, et cetera. And at the same time, many of the solutions that are offered for this are maybe even worse than the disease. They are, top-down oriented content moderation attempts that many view as being, censorship in disguise, or sometimes even explicitly. And many of the people even who are sort of more sympathetic to some of these measures, now that they see the way that they're used in the hands of executives that maybe don't have as similar of an orientation towards them, are becoming very concerned about them. But there is an alternative. So in Taiwan, you have a country that has, according to many evaluations, one of the freest, if not the freest, press and media and internet environment in the world. And at the same time, over the course of the decade from 2014 to 2024, they managed to go from a situation where they had the national legislature being occupied not for 3 hours, but for 3 weeks by protesters, to the second lowest effective polarization in the world, and extremely resilient against disinformation attacks from a very focused nation-state actor with a much more disproportionate size than just about anywhere else. So I want to tell you a little bit about how using some of the tools from Taiwan might help us instantiate some of the ideas similar to what the Hutchins Commission came up with for preserving a free press while maintaining the responsibility of that press in the era of social media. And the core idea I want to talk about, there's actually many things going on, but I only have a lightning talk, so I can't go through all of them. But the core idea was this concept that shows up very core in the Hutchins Commission of balancing and bridging. So the notion in the Hutchins Commission was that you had to present as news the things that people can agree to across the divides that exist within society, and you need to show a representative portrait of the diversity of society in the opinion section. And that is something that was done by editorial boards for a very long time, but can be done algorithmically. How can it be done algorithmically? Well, this was the core thing that they used in Taiwan. Basically, you can cluster opinions, and then you can draw out representative opinions from each of the clusters, and then score and uprank things that bring people together across the clusters that exist. And this is called bridging ranking, and was the foundation of something that many of you are probably familiar with, this idea of community notes. So community notes was an attempt at X to use two things that they had developed in the Taiwan environment, this notion of bridging ranking and of citizen contributed contextualization as opposed to top-down fact-checking, and to make them the core of the way that then Twitter as Birdwatch and now X as Community Notes does reaction to misleading content. And this has now spread to all sorts of other environments. It's become kind of the gold standard in social media. It's being used on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, etc. But it has some really important limitations. There is no incentive really for someone to write a note. There's not even much reputational incentive. There's no way to earn a living writing notes. So there's not a lot created. And all it does is contextualize actually a quite small fraction of all content, but the actual virality of that content and its initial presentation is completely driven by the logic of engagement maximization rather than the logic of bridging and balancing, which were, under the Hutchins Commission, so core to the whole mission of the newspaper. So we have a proposal to extend this to the whole way that the presentation of the material and the recommendation system that drives its placement works. And the basic idea is that posts would have, right at the bottom of them, little icons. The icons would represent different communities that you're a part of. You might be an American, but you might also be a Catholic. You might also be a Democrat, and you might be in a small town, some particular small town, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Each of those would be communities that the system had identified you as being part of, which it already does, by the way, to help advertisers target you, as well as to place content with you. And it would show on a piece of content which community you're a part of that this is basically trending in. And is it a source of division or unity within that community? So like you can imagine there's an American flag with a green circle around it, but there's a picture of the Vatican with a red circle around it. So it's uniting to Americans, but divisive among Catholics or vice versa, et cetera. And that this would give you an indication of sort of the social provenance of this information. Who is the audience that you're co-consuming it with, and then it's bringing you together with? And where might you need a contrasting perspective? And you could click on that community and get a contrasting perspective on this issue from other people, from other perspectives within that community. And in fact, X, this is part of these is a mock-up, but part of this is actually X started experimenting with exactly this based on some conversation we've been having with them. For people who use community notes, you can get these labels as to when a post is divisive or uniting. And this also invites an interesting change to the business model to create economic incentives for this kind of bridging and balancing content. So it allows two very different kinds of business models than at present. First, you can actually have the communities fund the content but not to advertise a specific thing, but rather just to uprank things that bring their community together within the feeds of their members. Now, that might sound a little bit weird, but if you think about the amount of money that various communities, from universities to countries to churches, put into content to bring people together within that community, that's a large fraction of the budget of many of those organizations, and way bigger than the amount that's spent on advertising. So actually, as a business model, it's potentially a larger source of revenue. While everyone says how lucrative targeted advertising is, the reality is actually it's not nearly as lucrative as many other forms of advertising. In fact, per impression minute, you get way more for a Super Bowl ad than you get for targeted advertising. Because targeted advertising, by its nature, it's going individually to one person, so you have to get them to take a specific action at that moment. There's not really much brand building value to targeted advertising because it can't, like, the 1984 Apple commercial or the share a Coke commercial create a sense of common meaning that is associated with that brand. Whereas if you are aware of the audience that you're sharing it with, you create this notion of common knowledge, that we all know this thing together. We all expect that other people will understand this. There's a wonderful new book out by Steven Pinker explaining this idea. And by creating this sense of a common audience that I'm sharing something with, you can recreate this sense of common knowledge, which is, I think, critical to overcoming the problems of loneliness and polarization, but it's also critical to having a brand advertisement that's effective. So we actually believe this can be a better business model in many cases. And so we're trying this out. We're working with a variety of different platforms across the political spectrum, across the spectrum from open source to closed, et cetera. Renee is maybe going to talk in a little bit about some of the things that may facilitate this, and one of the experiments we're working on in more of the open source space. But I've got 5 minutes left, and I would love to invite some questions from all of you in that time. Yeah, please.
How can the Taiwan model work in a highly diverse society?
Well, it's great that you asked that question, because I would argue that Taiwan is actually a much more diverse society than our society in some certain ways. People don't think that because there's a stereotype that many people have in the back of their minds that's sort of like, they're all, Asians on a little island, they must all get along. But it actually turns out that Taiwan has been colonized by like 5 different completely different societies with completely different languages over time. They have the second highest religious diversity anywhere in the world, and they don't even agree on the name of the country or its flag. So if you go to the ruling parties, like rallies, there will be, the national flag does not exist, and they do not recognize the name of the entity according to other countries. So anyways, it's a very complex and divided place in many ways. And that's why it had 3, week-long occupation of its legislature. And it took a lot to bring them together. And I really think it's got a lot of potential here. But if you're interested in this, I've got a book called Plurality with their former digital minister. It's fully democratically governed and open source, so you can get it free online. And I brought a bunch of copies with me. If anyone wants one, you can come get it. Yes, sorry, please. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, please. Does anyone else have a question?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
How exactly is the Taiwan model implemented? Is that a law? Is it a requirement on media companies? What's the structure of that?
No. So there was absolutely no mandates on anything. It was a government-supported civic project that government agencies sort of agreed that they would take advisory from this so that it created a draw to it. And also is a platform for proposing legislation where the legislature, if it got good scores along this dimension, had to take them seriously. So it was not, there was no mandates of anything. Yeah. Oh. Other questions? Yeah.
Hi, Glenn. I'm Logan.
Hey, Logan.
I enjoyed the part about the sort of unifying or divisive labels in addition to things on community notes. I really like the community notes function on X as it is. But I also wonder whether it could be sort of like a confirmation bias problem. So, for example, I'm from the Midwest, and I like professional sports more than college sports. And if I saw something with a community note that's like, it's unifying to Midwesterners and divisive to Northeasterners, and it's unifying to fans of pro sports and divisive to fans of college sports, I might be more inclined to just like it more because I know it's unifying to the people I like, as opposed to being sort of taking it as an opportunity to interrogate my own biases.
I don't think you're uniformly wrong. I'm sure there's some people who have that reaction, but I don't see that as a problem. Like, fundamentally, like I do really believe in free speech, and I believe that the key problem that we have is not that people need to be all forced to be this or that or whatever. It's that they lack the ability and awareness to understand the social context they exist within, and the communities that they're a part of lack the ability, if they want to subsidize or encourage content that brings that community together. So it's a lack of freedom that I'm worried about, not necessarily the people choosing that they want to be in this community. Or it used to be there was always KKK material. It's not illegal. I think the problem that has come is that it used to be that you had to go to a particular context to get that, and you knew what you were getting, and you were doing something non-mainstream. And now there's been so much mixed together in these personalized things, and you don't know why you're getting it, that social context is lost. So maybe one more quick question. Yeah, please. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm curious if you unpack that dichotomy of divisive or inclusive as like the data model we use, and particularly vis-a-vis polarization, where you already have so much channelization and segmentation going on. It seems like
Yeah, I think you're gonna have to look at the paper on that, but there's a lot of technical detail in terms of how those things are defined. So, but yes, yeah.